Even though everyone is here because of HLVR, I find that the most important parts of these videos are the mini reviews of the newly released indie VR games. The VR industry, especially on Steam, needs a huge kick in the pants, and yes, most can assume that HLVR could be that kick. However, we have no idea when the game will release, so the industry is in this weird middle period with no end in sight. Valve's HMD is closely upon us, along with their first of 3 in-house games. However, most probably don't remember that Valve was at one time partnered with Oculus, and until the Facebook buyout, Michael Abrash worked at Valve. This is the topic for another video, but keep in mind, the VR industry is segmented because of the Facebook buyout, and Valve is not playing any of the games Oculus chooses to play. So, we do not have any Valve-funded third-party games, Valve-published VR titles, or anything exclusive to the SteamVR platform due to Valve's ideas and morals. If the VR industry is going to succeed, it needs people buying and playing the content consistently. If you don't have a headset yet, the Samsung Odyssey Plus recently released and is selling for $300 with controllers, and some used Windows Mixed Reality HMDs sell for much less. I get asked all the time if it's worth buying a Vive or waiting for Valve's HMD, and my answer is always, get a Windows Mixed Reality headset to hold you over until Valve's, because we don't know when Valve's will be releasing. So I'm going to be mixing in VR reviews throughout this video to make sure you don't leave once I start talking about them like last time. We're going to start with Accounting Plus, created by Justin Roiland and William Pooh, the people behind Rick and Morty and the Stanley Parable respectively. Accounting Plus is an expansion to their free experience from 2016, adding many new levels, secrets, Easter eggs, and voice acting, and while experiencing everything almost quadruples the runtime. The game, like the Stanley Parable, is best played with little known going in. However, my advice is to wait for the characters around you to stop talking. There is an absurd amount of voice lines in these games, and my favorite bits are when I was just waiting around listening to the people scream at me over many different things. SteamVR has had a few major updates over the last few months, most technically important being the introduction of motion smoothing, a new reprojection method that gives the illusion of a full 90 frame rate even if the GPU is only calculating 45. With the plateauing of processing capabilities coming from the major manufacturers, much of what game developers have to do in order to push graphics is now to optimize, and through motion smoothing alone, the min spec of VR has been lowered once again. When SteamVR sees that an application isn't going to make frame rate, motion smoothing kicks in. It looks at the last 2 delivered frames, estimates motion and animation, and extrapolates a new frame. Synthesizing new frames keeps the current application at full frame rate, advances motion forward, and avoids jutter. Also introduced were 2 new places for SteamVR Home, and these are interesting for a few reasons. First, SteamVR Home has been the most consistently updated piece of Valve content in 2018, with each of these new destinations being fully realized worlds with theming and amazing art. There are reasons for this, however. They're made by contractors. Valve is not creating these per se. These environments are created by non-Valve employees contracted to do just these, and they end up being a frequently released product. The issue is, and just maybe my issue, SteamVR Home has never worked. It stutters like crazy, it crashes before launching most of the time nowadays, and it fades in and out if it ever does load into an environment. It's a mess. I've had the VR team members help me with technical support a few times, and it still doesn't work. I have no idea what I'm doing wrong, but what drives me crazy is that I can't play the thing Valve has been updating like crazy this year. Red Matter was one of my favorite VR games this month. This is an adventure exploration puzzle game that takes place on a base in space. Everyone that's supposed to be here is missing, and you need to figure out exactly what happened by solving environmental puzzles. The player interacts with the world with the one controller that can turn into a scanner for information, a flashlight, and a grabber, with the other hand also being a grabber with the locomotion controls, which were great. 2 buttons on the controllers were used. One moves the player in the direction of the controller slowly, and the other teleports the player around. The story is interesting, well acted, and well paced. The graphics are the best I've seen in VR, and it runs really well. The puzzles and environments are incredibly well put together, and it really adds to the whole atmosphere of the game. The greatest issue of this game, however, are the interactions between the player and the world. Many times throughout my time in the game, the controllers would do things I didn't intend them to do, because it was picking up my inputs on the pad incorrectly. I want to slowly move forward, I turn 45 degrees. I want to use the flashlight, the scanner comes up instead. Also, the physics engine used in this game needs a lot of work, as interactions between items in the world just don't work at all. The game goes for a low gravity feel due to this taking place on an alien planet. However, the items are far too floaty to be comfortable and either have way too much weight or way too little weight. And most importantly, when you get to this part with the capacitors, hold the board in one hand and place the capacitors on it with the other. I tried to place the capacitors while the board sat on a table, and well, that's it. Red Matter has length. Kept me interested the entire entire time, told an interesting story, and essentially gave my favorite locomotion system in VR thus far. It was my favorite VR game this month, and I highly recommend it. Valve Index was a recent trademark that was found filed directly by Valve earlier in the month. 2 trademarks in total, one for computer hardware, computer networking hardware, computer peripherals, computer hardware, and computer software for the reproduction, processing, and streaming of audio, video, data, text, and multimedia content, and another for computer and video game consoles, peripherals, and accessories. There is very little information on exactly what these do. However, looking at the little documentation that does exist, it appears that this is a system for Valve to rate and index games for one of 2 purposes: speculation. The way I see it, it's either A, a rating system Valve will implement onto Steam in a similar way to ESRB that will allow finer control over the types of content you will see on the Steam platform, or B, a testbed for games to be sold that allows users to register their PC specifications and ensure that any game they purchase on Steam will run on the customer's system. Imagine each game being given a value based on the actual hardware required needed to run the game at the customer's defined parameters, for example, desired resolution, frame rate, etc. And through a series of automated tests, Valve will tell the customer if the game is actually playable on their hardware, completely ending the misrepresentation of game performance and bad min-spec requirements. It could go so far as to warn or make more difficult to purchase games the user's hardware will just not run, and also likely ties into Valve's rumored foray into the living room space for a second time, the information of which is for another video. To sum up, there are a lot of rumors flying around about Valve manufacturing an in-house series of living room boxes, complete with their own OS, Proton, controllers, and modules to allow for easy upgradability. That said, nothing is real until confirmed, so we have to wait and see. Runes: The Forgotten Path was an interesting yet clunky experience. The basic draw of this game is the rune/spell system that has the player drawing specific spells to enable specific abilities, similar to Arx Fatalis from Arcane. Casting spells, switching between them at will, and the interactions between locomotion and player interactions with others, mostly enemies, is so well done and is my favorite part of the game. The issue is how much of the game is spent doing things aside from fighting monsters and casting spells. Within the first hour, half of that time will be spent placing lettered drawers into holes with runes on it in order to create specific items out of their contents. I understand the usefulness of player-driven creation, especially in a fantasy setting where you're creating your own spells. However, with so much of the first hour or two being hand-holding, first-person narrative exposition, and a small room interaction puzzles, the true meat of the game being spellcasting is hidden from most players. I greatly dislike in VR when the character you are supposed to be playing narrates as well, as it goes against the core philosophy of first-person VR, the character-player immersion. I can't trick myself into thinking I'm casting spells and defeating monsters if the person I am is saying things that I wouldn't. The smooth as hell combat, however, very much makes it worth your time if you have patience. Hideo Kojima, creator of many of Konami's most successful and recognizable IPs, such as Metal Gear, and later mistreated so badly that Konami canceled all of his projects, he left, they lied, was at Valve for a second time in the last few years. In early November, Kojima posted some pictures of him in the new offices of Valve, marking his visit. His original visit back in mid-2016 was most likely his industry-wide search for an engine for Death Stranding. Now, his reasons for visiting Valve are unknown. However, realize that he is there for a reason. Many ideas have been thrown around. He could be asking Gabe and friends what they think of Death Stranding while his team gives the thoughts of HLVR. He could be there organizing, negotiating, or proposing a partnership, either for software, Steam, manpower, or something completely different. However, he could have been there for many reasons. Valve most likely attempted to show him HLVR there though, and their new VR hardware for critique. Something they have reportedly been doing for most game developers since March of this year. And while on the topic of HLVR, Zero Caliber VR is a single-player military shooter that needs drastic amounts of work. Here's the deal. The setting, theming, graphics, sound design, and level design are incredible. The gunplay is and the controls and physics are horrible. Most games that have what is called smooth locomotion, or essentially moving your VR character with a joystick, use the Vive touchpad as a virtual analog stick, with the further you move your thumb in any direction from the center, the faster you move your character. Zero Caliber essentially maps the regions of the pad to WASD, and you are in a full sprint regardless of where your thumb is. There is very little in terms of user comfort settings, and as a person who plays VR almost every day, this game surprised me with just how sick I got. A large selling point of this game is the interactions with the weaponry, allowing users to assemble most of the guns and physically attach sights, scopes, suppressors, and a wide variety of mags and clips. That's great. However, the movement is so imprecise that adjusting oneself in an area where these items are in reach is a chore, and usually results in jerky back and forth motions that usually lend to my sickness. This game is is an excellent example on how VR is supposed to be made. The basic interactions with the world need to be solid. However, it doesn't matter how much effort you put into your game. People will still get sick and not want to play. Until the movement and interaction systems are adjusted to better accommodate player comfort, I don't recommend this. However, once it is, this will be a fantastic VR first-person shooter. A little over a week ago, images leaked on Imgur of Valve's current in-development HMD. The pictures were from July and are not representative of where this project currently is. However, that didn't stop a lot of people, including myself, from speculating on exactly what this headset, and there has been conflicting information floating around on the exact specifications of this headset and the rumor that it would come bundled with a Half-Life 2 prequel we commonly refer to as HLVR on this channel. Now, before going any further, I want to make something completely clear. Nothing I'm about to say is confirmation of fact. Unless Valve themselves make an announcement, nothing is completely real. That said, I've spent the better part of the last week sourcing as much information on the headset and game as possible, and I've definitely found some. Aside from the usual speculation, I want to introduce a new speculation system, this one being color-coded. If the speculation sign is green, that means the information I am speaking of is not only speculation, but also sourced from 2 to 4 verified sources. If yellow, the information has a single source to it, and if red, the information is being assumed from other information, past sources, or the sources themselves have yet to be verified. So with that said, green, speculation. The Steamvr headset is something that has always been in production in some shape or form. However, through most of its life, it was used as a research and development piece before high-level consumer hardware was capable of the features Valve wanted to create. Originally, Valve wanted VR to be an open platform, and instead of creating hardware, they wanted to create an open standard by which all VR headsets operate. This would allow for massive amounts of collaboration between companies and developers and would allow for the fastest development possible given the circumstances. The first roadblock to this goal was the surprise move of Michael Abrash to Oculus and the multi-billion-dollar buyout from Facebook, which was mostly done due to Oculus showing Facebook predominantly Valve-created systems, specifically room scale, without Valve being credited at the time. Due to Oculus already having a few years and a few prototypes under their belt, it would make sense they would be the first to market. However, after the separation between Valve and them, for many reasons, they would not be using SteamVR officially, and the VR market was segmented. Valve still wanted to find partners for their VR standard, and at first worked with HTC, who, wanting to remain competitive with Oculus, shipped a far less developed HMD system, essentially a dev kit. HTC caused a host of other problems, announcing their Half-Life VR game before one was even in development, using Chell in their ad campaign, announcing a massive leap forward for CES 2017 only to be a camera on the front, selling replacement hardware for an incredible markup, having terrible customer support, and confusing many in the general public exactly who was making the Vive itself, as Valve has only actually created the SteamVR standard and Lighthouse. The HMD and controllers were HTC's. Now that the Vive Pro and wireless adapter have shipped with 0 Valve interactions, it's safe to assume that that partner has lessened at least. So that leads us to Valve's headset, with an interchangeable front plate for different new pieces of hardware, an internal USB port likely for developers, 2 front lenses, possibly for augmented reality, but definitely for proximity awareness for double tracking of the controllers, and the main chip being an ICE40 FPGA and a wireless 2.4 GHz chip for controller communication only, as this is a wired headset. It needs to be to drive the resolution of 2840 by 2860, and that's both eyes added together due to the main graphics chip, the ANX 7538, running at that resolution with 120 Hz refresh. The audio solution gives the user a sense of feeling in their ears, with the example I've heard a few times being the ability to feel a person whisper in your ears in a game. I've heard from 2 different places that this headset is a 150-degree FOV, with the only contradicting information being from Upload VR, stating that it's 135 FOV. The resolution of the panels themselves have yet to be seen. However, as seeing the chip's capabilities, it's possible to assume the headset will be manufactured by Valve, sold on Steam, bundled with the Knuckles controllers, some form of Lighthouse 2.0, and a game being HLVR. As for HLVR specifically, green speculation. The game takes place before the events of Half-Life 2, and you play as Alex Vance before meeting Gordon Freeman. This game has been in development since at least mid-2015, and Valve does not wish this to be an exclusive for any platform. That said, many features of this game are only going to be experienced on Valve's hardware, a compromise between exclusivity and the open nature. This game is running on Source 2, and Valve has apparently said that they aim for this to be one of the longest VR games in the market, and they will make the game as long as possible, as long as it's good. The locomotion system is based on teleportation, with the player unable to teleport around when near enemies, and zombies, headcrabs, unfriendly vortigaunts, antlions, and most importantly, cremators from the Half-Life 2 beta are all seen in the game. The weapon set is smaller than any other Half-Life game, with each weapon focused on fine interactions with the guns. Current weapon set being a pistol, SMG, shotgun, energy gun, grenade, and trip mine. Yellow, speculation. Due to the past decade's worth of unreleased assets for Half-Life developed, HLVR HLVR is one of the best looking VR games to date, and the return of Cremators lines up with a very specific version of Half-Life developed from 2013 to 2015 that took inspiration from cut elements of Half-Life 2. HLVR, which includes Cremators in some way, may also include these other cut elements from Half-Life 2. The specifics have yet to be defined. The team behind the game mostly consists of developers new to the Half-Life series, at least in a released sense. However, the people in charge of the team are veterans of the Half-Life series. The gameplay goes between interaction-based puzzles, first-person shooting of many types, and scripted, yet not through a cutscene, storytelling. Red speculation. Multiplayer and co-op may be in development, however the co-op mode may just be another title altogether. The story itself will not be focused on a centralized goal due to the prequel nature of the game, and instead focus on the backstory of the many settings and characters from Half-Life 2. Spoilers for the game of Half-Life VR. The game may end with Alex fighting Combine and saving Freeman with the line, "Dr. Freeman, I presume." Now, there is a lot more about HLVR out there. However, they come in the form of leaked strings from the last 2 years, all of which, along with a more refined leaked rumor mill you just heard, will be the subject of a future video. Once again, I want to stress that everything just discussed is not being confirmed. It is instead only being relayed through verified sources, and any detail of this game can and likely will change until it's announced. Exactly when and how we learn officially about the long-awaited return of Half-Life is unknown. But I mean, hey, Valve's making a beta mod. I hope they can finish it.